Emil, Elena, and Katrina, all names familiar to South Mississippi, and we remember them as some of the most damaging hurricanes along the coast.
But what's the importance of giving names to hurricanes? To explain, here's meteorologist Taylor Graham with today's Weather Why.
Yeah, this is one of the most common questions I get when we have studio tour groups or I go and visit school groups. Why do hurricanes and tropical storms even have names to begin with? And that hasn't always been the case. It wasn't until 1953 that we started to give tropical storms and hurricanes names. Why are they used? Well, they found out that short names are pretty easy to communicate and for the public to remember. There used to be some confusion as well whenever there were two or more systems in the Atlantic Basin, maybe the Caribbean. It would get confusing to not have names of those systems. Sometimes the forecasts would get confused with storms, and so they decided it would be best to streamline communication and name these systems. So once a tropical depression becomes a tropical storm, when it gets those winds of 39 miles per hour or greater, that is when it's issued a name. Now, you may have noticed in the past that not all of these names are very familiar to us here in the U.S., and there is a reason why. Well, tropical systems can be formed all over the world, and specifically for the Atlantic, Caribbean, and for the Gulf of Mexico, we have countries like Central America or other Caribbean countries that maybe speak Spanish or they maybe speak French. So not all of the names on the list year by year are going to be familiar names to many of us in the U.S. One of those examples, Alberto. Typically, we associate that with the Spanish language. Rafael, that's another name that maybe we don't hear as much around here. That's another question I get as to why some of these names may not be as familiar to us for some of our English-speaking folks here in the U.S. So that's a good reminder that tropical systems can impact several different countries, and that's why they maybe aren't quite as familiar to us. So who names them? It's the World Meteorological Society or organization, I should say, excuse me, that is definitely a mouthful for many of us. They decide the names. The names are reused every 6 years unless the names are retired. And one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this topic is because there are several name systems that may landfall this week in the Gulf of Mexico that have retired names. So they're retired if they bring significant impacts and damage. And many examples, just like what we had this week, Hurricane Katrina, Ida, Idalia, Laura, these are all name systems that will never be used again, or the names will never be used again because they cause so much damage and so much devastation to parts of the coast.